Hi, kids. Okay, next on the marquee is Poltergeist. It was released June 4th, 1982, the summer of Spielberg. It had a budget of about $10.7 million, made $121.7 million at the box office. A lot of the stuff regarding Poltergeist is the rumor, the myth, what have you about who actually directed Poltergeist. So it's credited to Tobe Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but a lot of people are saying that Spielberg directed it. So this video is mostly going to be looking at that, and then there is Toby has claimed that that rumor affected his ability to get work after Poltergeist. So I'll look at that a little bit too. First up, so Poltergeist was Spielberg's idea. After Close Encounters, he had toyed with the idea of a family being terrorized by aliens. That was reworked into Poltergeist, but also reworked into E.T., which plays a part in this whole narrative. So Spielberg met with a team of writers. He had liked some of their work, and he approached them about a different project. He was wanting to do a remake of a film that he would eventually remake. His title of the film is Always. If you don't know what that movie is, go look it up because this video is about Poltergeist. We've got a lot to cover. So, Poltergeist. So he met with them. They weren't really interested with that project, but he mentioned that he also had a ghost story that he was working on. They were interested in that, so they get hired to write the screenplay for the ghost story, which becomes Poltergeist. How much input Spielberg really had in the overall story is hard to get any information on. I don't know if it's like Halloween or Friday the 13th, where it's here's the concept, you go, you work on it. He met with the writers a couple times. They said he didn't have a lot of inputs, but who knows what plot points or story beats or anything that he wanted. At any rate, they're credited as the writers. He's credited as story by. It's not what this video is about. So, yeah, they say he says he has an idea for a ghost movie. They go to work on the ghost movie. Now, Tobe Hooper will say that he met with Spielberg also about Night Skies, about the movie about aliens terrorizing a family, and he wasn't very interested in it. And he suggested, what if it was ghosts instead? So Toby says that aspect was his idea. Maybe it is. Maybe Spielberg met with Toby before he met with the writers. It's hard to find any concrete information about Poltergeist that isn't just discussing the rumor and the he said and the she said of it all. So, Spielberg, the timeline is hard to investigate too. So, Spielberg finished production on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in around September of 1980. Okay. Production of Poltergeist started around May of 1981. So there's quite a gap there. Now, Spielberg was also producing, directing, in pre-production for E.T. So these two ideas split, or this one idea split into two different movies. E.T. he was making for Universal. Apparently he had a clause in his contract that was basically restricting him from directing another movie, probably in regards to Poltergeist, while he's supposed to be doing E.T. Because these two movies, it's called The Summer of Spielberg, they come out, I think, a week apart. So the studio obviously doesn't want Spielberg making a movie that's competing with their movie that he's making with them. So that plays into this a little bit, right? any rate, the movie gets made. And I'm going to go into a few different things that people have said, because in July of 1981, there was an anticipated Directors Guild strike. So there's some thought that Spielberg hired Toby as the director, had him on set, so that when the Directors Guild strike started and production would have to stop, that when it resumed, Toby could take over. So Toby was there to follow everything that he's doing. When the strike comes, Spielberg can just leave and he can go focus on E.T. when it resumes. Because the two casts on these films both have a lot of young actors, and you can't wait around a lot for that. So maybe the thinking is, okay, well, Toby can finish Poltergeist, and I'll go start E.T. when the strike is over. That's a theory. Another theory is that Spielberg was just there as producer all the time to make sure he was pushing production to get the movie filmed before the strike happens. Things to think about. But at any rate, in June, there's an article coming out that's claiming, so while the movie's still being in production, because it was in production from about May to August, claiming that Spielberg's actually directing it, not Toby. So this is a thing, this is a rumor, during the movie being made. And then Spielberg would eventually, before the release of the movie, before it hit theaters, he put out an open letter to Toby, basically apologizing, saying that anyone thinking that it's his fault, that maybe he overstepped his bounds as a producer. So Spielberg's the producer, Toby's the director. So the director's job, right, is to capture the vision. He's supposed to translate what's in the script to the screen, right, in the way that he sees fit, whether he's the lighting, the sets, the hair, the makeup, everything visually that goes into the movie, they're in charge of, they have the final say on, right? The producer is more on the financial side. To secure things, to secure sets, locations, to make sure they have everything they need. The director has everything that he needs to make the movie. Okay, so those are the two roles. That's how it's supposed to go. So, with those claims, let's get into some of the things some of the people involved with the production are saying. You can just decide for yourself who directed Poltergeist. So Frank Marshall, he's another one of the producers, produced alongside Spielberg on a number of films. He comes out and says, yeah, no, Toby is the director, and that, but Steven Spielberg did all the storyboards for the film. Steven did the storyboards, but Toby executed it. Toby was the director. Toby himself says that he did about half of the storyboards. So even Toby says he didn't do all the storyboards. Zelda Rubinstein, the little person in the film, one of the actresses, she says she was on set for 6 days. Spielberg was the director. That's what she says. James Caron, another one of the actors in the movie, says, no, Toby was the director. Okay, we're getting conflicting stories here. Martin Carcella, he says it was mostly Toby as the director. Who else? Craig Reardon, he worked in the makeup effects, special effects. He says that the final word on everything, final say, decision on everything was Spielberg. He learned early in production to go to Spielberg first because Toby would approve something and Spielberg would veto it and say, no, it has to be this. Okay? John Linetti, he was the first assistant cameraman. He says that, that Steven was the director. And with the strike coming, Steven was director, like I mentioned earlier. Toby was just there, just to keep an eye, just in case they needed Toby instead. Jo Beth Williams, a little young actress. She says that kind of both of them were the director, but Spielberg had the final say. William Goldsmith, is that his name? Who did the score, says he never even talked to Toby. Spielberg was in charge of, or relayed what he wanted for the music, for the film, 100% all Spielberg. And then finally, Mick Garris, who on this film worked as the publicist, says that, that Toby was the director and that all of the pre-production was all Toby. So I don't know what to make from that. After the filming stops, Toby is the one in the editing booth, but even that is been claimed to be untrue, that Spielberg had say over the final edit. Toby was in the edit, but Spielberg would say what gets in and what doesn't. Now, while Toby's editing, Spielberg is at ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, overseeing all the special effects work, the ghosts, all that stuff. ILM did. You can even, there's the documentary on ILM. It's on Disney Plus. You can watch that. There are scenes discussing the work they did on that movie, and it's all Spielberg. You can't see Toby. Maybe you can see Toby, but it's Spielberg saying what he wants. So it's complicated. Who directed Poltergeist? I don't know. What do you think? Now, secondly, let's get into the claim. And by the way, so production ends in August, and Spielberg starts filming the first week of September. He starts filming E.T. Keep that in mind too. Okay, so the claim from Toby is that after this whole guffaw that he directed it and he didn't directed it, and that they had to make a claim with the Directors Guild, ultimately it was found that the studio was wrong in over promoting Spielberg, using Spielberg's name to sell the movie in trailers, in promotion of everything. They were wrong, but it didn't rule on whether or not Spielberg was the director or Toby was the director, or if they should make more of a statement. Okay, so Toby says after that, no major studios wanted to hire him as a director because of this. So I'm going to go in and a little bit and just look at Toby's work before Poltergeist and after, in the same kind of time period, right? So Toby directs the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974. Okay, there's 8 years between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist being released. So go over his career in those 8 years, over his career in the 8 years after, right? So after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he directs Eaten Alive. That's released in 1976. It's a low-budget movie. Eventually, it would become, it was on the list of video nasties. It's a thing in the UK. It's like films that couldn't be sold on home video. They weren't in video stores. You couldn't rent them. You couldn't buy them. So Eaten Alive was video nasties, too graphic for them. Low budget movie though. It's hard to find anything on the budget or the box office. It's that low of a budget, right? Next, he does The Dark, 1979. He is removed from that project as director because it was behind schedule, so the studio replaced him as director. And it's another low-budget independent film. Okay, then he does Salem's Lot. It's a TV movie, $4 million budget, which is way above any budget that he had seen at that time. And he got that basically on the strength of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Next is Funhouse, released in 1981. It's got a $3 million budget now for a movie. It grossed $7.8 million at the box office. Okay, not too bad. It opened in 814 screens. Off the strength of a Funhouse is why Toby gets Poltergeist, reportedly. Then is Venom, also released in 1981. It had around a $9 million budget. It's hard to get a solid number because it was filmed in the UK and the budget reports are in pounds, but around there. Only grossed about $5.2 million though, so didn't live up, right? It lost money. And he was replaced on that. There are conflicting. Some say the studio wasn't happy. Some say there was disagreements with the studio. The director who replaced him says that Toby had a nervous breakdown. Then is Poltergeist. Then after Poltergeist, so Poltergeist is 1982. His next film released is in 1985. So after Poltergeist, he signs a 3-picture deal with Canon Films. So not a huge studio, but not exactly a low budget studio. Canon Films famously produced Masters of the Universe, the He-Man movie. So it's that kind of film. So he makes Life Force. The budget eventually goes to $25 million. And keep in mind, the budget for Poltergeist is 10.7. It's way bigger budget. Filming was scheduled to be 17 weeks, went 5 weeks over. Reportedly, it was just shut down. Canon Films was on the verge of bankruptcy. They shut down the production a couple of times because they were running out of money. The movie apparently wasn't even completed when they stopped filming, and they just had to work from what they had. Yeah, and let's see, what did it gross? About $11.6 million out of a $25 million budget, so lost money. Next film he makes for Canon Films is Invasion from Mars. That has a smaller budget, $7 million. It grossed about $4.9 million. That was released in 1986. And then in 1986, for Canon Films, it also releases Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 with a budget of $4.5 million. It makes $8 million at the box office. But it was released in theaters unrated because the MPAA, who give the ratings, wouldn't give it anything but an X. So they just released it without a rating. So it grosses not too bad considering that it's an unrated film. And then from there, Toby has smaller $3 million or far less budget films. So did this rumor affect Toby's ability to get work? It's hard to say. He was getting removed from productions as the director before Poltergeist. So maybe being behind schedule is why. But maybe it's a combination of things. I don't know. What do you think? Who directed Poltergeist? And did it affect Tobe Hooper's career? Anyways, that's this video. I think it's long enough. Hit like, hit subscribe, comment if you want to. What do you think? Tell me. Next video, I'm going to jump ahead in time a lot. to a movie that some people still might say it's not a horror movie. Maybe it's a thriller. See you then. Thanks.